They say stillness is weakness. That silence means submission. But in some places, staying quiet isn't surrender. It's survival. In Sheridan, Wyoming, where the winters bite through bone and the stairs linger longer than they should, one girl didn't raise her voice. She didn't swing first. She simply stood. And somehow, that made her dangerous. This isn't a story about fighting back the way you think. It's not about revenge or rage. It's about a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't ask for attention, but commands it. And if you think silence means there's nothing left to say, you haven't met Naomi Tran. The wind had a sharpness to it that morning, the kind that made you tuck your chin into your coat without thinking. Naomi sat in the back seat of a weathered pickup, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the mountains that rose like walls around the town. Her breath fogged the window, and she didn't bother wiping it clear. The road narrowed as they entered Sheridan. Rows of quiet houses, flags, trucks in every driveway. A place that didn't like change, let alone strangers. Her mother, Helen, glanced at her through the mirror. "This is home now," she said. Naomi didn't answer. She just looked ahead, still and unreadable. The first bell rang like a warning more than a welcome. Naomi stood at the front gate of Sheridan High, her blazer zipped to the top, fingers curled tightly inside her sleeves. Students drifted past in loose clusters, some laughing, some silent, but all with eyes that flicked her way and then looked again. She didn't return the stares. She walked slow, measured, like each step was part of a rhythm only she could hear. Inside, the walls were lined with trophy cases and faded class photos. A mural read, "Pride, Strength, Tradition." Naomi passed under it without a glance. Her locker was near the water fountain. She opened it, placed her books inside, and closed it gently. No slamming. No sighs, just motion without noise. In first period English, the seat beside her stayed empty for a moment too long. Then a boy dropped into it, turned to her and asked, "So, you from China or somewhere?" Naomi looked at the board and replied, "Wyoming." He snorted. "Right. Must be adopted or something." The teacher didn't look up. No one did. Lunch was worse. Naomi sat on a bench near the back of the cafeteria, unpacked a small Tupperware, and unwrapped a rice ball her mother had packed that morning. Across the room, a group of cheerleaders whispered and giggled, their eyes locked on her tray. One of them said, loud enough to carry, "Smells like someone microwaved the ocean." The others laughed. Naomi didn't look up. She didn't eat faster or slower. She simply took her next bite. Later, as she walked down the math hallway, a paper airplane landed at her feet. On it, someone had drawn slanted eyes and labeled it Ninja Barbie. She picked it up, folded it twice, and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't stop walking. She didn't change her pace. But she felt it, the chill that wasn't from the weather, the kind that comes when people think you don't belong, and say it without ever using those words. That evening, the sky dimmed early. In Sheridan, darkness arrived like a closing curtain. Quiet. Total. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea. Across from her, Helen looked pale, the scarf on her head slipping just slightly, revealing the soft, uneven stubble left behind by the chemo. The silence between them was familiar, not uncomfortable, just full of things they didn't say out loud. Naomi got up, refilled her mother's glass with filtered water from the old fridge, and returned to her seat. "How was it?" Helen asked gently, not looking up. Naomi didn't answer right away. She stared at the steam rising from her mug. "It was quiet," she said at last. Helen gave a soft smile. "That kind of quiet," she said, "usually makes the loudest noise." After dinner, Naomi went to the garage. Boxes were stacked everywhere, some unopened, some half-crushed from the move. She pulled out a thin, dust-covered bag marked Dad. Inside was a wooden training staff, scarred with years of use. She remembered her father's hands gripping it, correcting her stance, his voice calm but firm. Stillness is your strongest position. Let the storm move around you. She returned to the backyard, set down a mat she found in one of the storage bins, and began to stretch. The cold bit at her fingers, but she welcomed it. It reminded her she could still feel something. She moved slowly at first, basic footwork, balance drills. Her breath came in even rhythms, fogging in front of her as she exhaled. Then she picked up the staff and moved through a familiar kata, the way he had shown her: step, shift, pivot, turn. Each movement was tight, clean, silent. From the window, Helen watched, her hand resting against the glass. Her daughter's body moved like water, but her eyes were still fire. Later that night, Naomi lay awake. Her room was small, bare except for a mattress, a lamp, and the old bookshelf they'd managed to bring from Denver. She stared at the ceiling. Her body ached, not from the training, but from holding it all in. The comments, the stares, the jokes whispered just loud enough. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a photo. Her and her dad, in a dojo somewhere outside Flagstaff, both wearing white uniforms. He stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. His expression unreadable, but she remembered that day. He'd said, "Control isn't about what they do to you. It's about what you choose not to do back." Naomi turned off the lamp. In the darkness, her eyes remained open, and her jaw stayed still, not clenched, not relaxed. Just centered, just waiting. The gym smelled like rubber and sweat. Naomi stood near the wrestling mats, arms at her sides, the fluorescent lights above flickering like tired eyes. Today's unit was equal contact, boys versus girls. The coach, a square-jawed man with a whistle always half-chewed, barked out names with no concern for matchups. When he called hers, there was a pause. Then he followed it with, "Clay Barrett." Clay stepped forward, 6'2", built like a fence post, the kind of boy who smirked before he even opened his mouth. He looked Naomi over once, then twice. "You sure?" he said, loud enough for the class to hear. "I don't want to get in trouble for breaking a toothpick." Some students chuckled. Coach didn't react. Naomi said nothing. She stepped onto the mat, adjusted her stance, and waited. The whistle blew. Clay lunged without form, just brute force and speed. Naomi shifted sideways, caught his weight, and turned it. He hit the mat with a thud. The room went silent. The coach raised a brow but didn't say a word. Clay grunted, pushed up. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. Second round. He came in faster, more aggressive. This time, he grabbed her wrist, tried to twist her into a pin. Naomi stepped through the grip, rotated, and dropped him again, clean, simple, like slicing through snow. The gym echoed with a deeper silence this time. Some jaws hung open, others just stared. The coach finally blew the whistle. "Next pair," he said. But no one moved. Clay stood slowly, face red. "What is this, some kung fu crap?" he barked. "She even human?" From the bleachers, someone added, "Probably that commie training her dad gave her." Naomi heard it. Every word. But she didn't look their way. Later that day, she found a flyer shoved into her locker. Sheridan's next street fighter. Watch out, boys. Someone had drawn her in a ninja outfit, eyes slanted, teeth exaggerated like a caricature. She crumpled it slowly, methodically, then placed it in her backpack. She didn't throw it away. She didn't show it to a teacher. She just carried it home like everything else. At dinner, Helen noticed her silence. "Rough day." Naomi looked down at her plate. "They're not afraid because I'm strong," she said softly. They're afraid because I didn't let them define me. Victor, standing by the sink, drying a dish, paused. He didn't turn around. Then you're already ahead of most people, he said. Now just keep your balance. Naomi nodded once. No fire. No tears. Just balance. The cafeteria was humming that Thursday. Trays clattering, chairs scraping against tile, voices bouncing off the high ceiling like bees in a jar. Naomi sat in her usual corner, beneath the faded mural of the school mascot, a bucking bronco that looked more tired than fierce. She unwrapped her lunch slowly. Rice, roasted vegetables, a boiled egg. The food smelled like home. And that, in Sheridan, made it a target. She didn't see Clay approach. One moment, she was reaching for her thermos. The next, a shadow fell over the table. A tray slammed down, not on the table, but onto her lap. Chicken tenders, ketchup, and chocolate milk exploded across her hoodie. The room went dead quiet. Clay stood there, arms wide like a showman, grin carved into his face. "Oops," he said, not even trying to hide the sarcasm. A phone camera clicked on, then another. Naomi looked down. Sauce soaked through her sleeves, dripping onto the floor. She didn't speak. She reached for a napkin, wiped her hands, once, calmly, then set the soiled tray aside. She looked up at Clay. "After school," she said, her voice even. "Parking lot. Just you and me." Clay blinked, caught off guard for half a second. "What? You want a rematch, Ninja Girl?" She didn't flinch. "If you win, I transfer out. If I win, you apologize, in front of everyone. And you leave me alone." The tension in the room snapped like a cable pulled too tight. Students turned in their seats. Someone whispered, "She's serious." Another said, "No way he can say no now." Clay looked around, at the eyes watching, the phones recording, the trap he'd laid for someone else now closing around him. He couldn't walk away. His pride wouldn't let him. "You're on," he said finally, his voice louder than it needed to be. "Just don't cry when it's over." Naomi stood slowly. Her back was soaked, but her spine stayed straight. She walked out of the cafeteria without another word. Behind her, the room erupted, not in cheers, but in murmurs. Doubt. Excitement. Fear. Not for Naomi, but for what it meant to stand up when you were supposed to stay quiet. That afternoon, while others spread rumors and placed bets, Naomi changed into black sneakers and a gray hoodie. She tied her braid tighter, took a sip of water, and stood in the backyard, breathing slow, steady. Victor leaned against the fence, arms crossed. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. Naomi looked up at the darkening sky. Not angry, not afraid, just ready. The stadium parking lot behind Sheridan High was wide and cracked, lined with faded yellow lines and old chewing gum stains. By 5:30, the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across the pavement. The cold had settled in, sharp enough to sting the lungs, but not enough to keep the crowd away. They came in clusters, students with phones half raised, a few teachers who claimed they were just passing by. Even some parents, drawn by whispers of what was about to happen. Naomi stood alone at the center, hoodie pulled over her head, hands tucked into her sleeves. Her breath came steady, misting in the air, her eyes fixed on nothing and everything all at once. Clay arrived 10 minutes late. Of course he did. He made his entrance like a local celebrity, laughing, flanked by 2 friends filming from both sides. "Didn't know Sensei would show," he shouted. "Thought you'd chicken out." Naomi didn't respond. She took a step forward. The crowd parted instinctively. Victor stood off to the side, leaning against a lamppost, saying nothing. His arms were folded, his face unreadable. But his eyes never left Naomi. Clay cracked his knuckles. No rules, right? He smirked. Just good old American ass-kicking. Naomi's stance shifted, barely. One foot slid back, her hands stayed down, fingers loose. Clay lunged. It was sloppy, fast, heavy, but wide open. Naomi didn't strike. She stepped to the side, redirected his weight with a slight push, and let him stumble past her. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not loud, just enough to sting. Clay turned, flushed, embarrassed. He swung again, this time wilder. Naomi ducked, sidestepped, swept his leg gently from behind. He hit the pavement hard, gasping. Victor didn't move. Clay rolled to his feet, furious now. "You think this proves something?" he barked. He charged again, reckless, fists clenched. Naomi didn't run. She met him head-on, twisted his arm mid-swing and used his momentum to throw him over her hip. He landed flat, the breath knocked clean from his chest. She stood over him, not triumphant, not gloating, just still. "If you raise your hand again," she said softly, "I will treat it as an attack. And next time, you won't get up." The crowd froze. Phones stopped recording. For a moment, all of Sheridan High held its breath. Naomi didn't wait for applause. She didn't look for approval. She turned, walked across the parking lot with calm steps and a steady spine. Victor nodded once. It wasn't a celebration, it was acknowledgement. The silence left behind was louder than any cheer. By sunrise the next morning, the fight had already gone viral, at least by small-town standards. The clip was grainy, shaky, but clear enough. A quarterback laid flat by a girl who didn't say a word. It was passed through group chats, posted on student pages, reshared by locals who added their own spin. She humiliated him, some wrote. Others said, she never even hit him. The Barrett family wasted no time. That evening, a special session was called at the school board. The town hall lights flickered above a room packed with parents, board members, teachers, and media from the next county over. At the front, Mayor Barrett sat stiffly beside his son. Clay wore a sling on one arm and a bruise under one eye that looked worse under the fluorescent light than it likely felt. The mayor stood to speak. "This was not a schoolyard scuffle," he said, voice firm, rehearsed. "My son was attacked on campus property by a trained fighter. We do not allow this kind of conduct in Sheridan." His words rang out heavy, bouncing off walls that had heard far less controversial things. In a corner of the room, Victor sat with his arms folded, jaw tight. Naomi beside him, her expression unreadable. When it was his turn, Victor walked to the podium without notes. His voice was low, even. "My daughter didn't strike him. She didn't threaten. She issued a challenge and gave him a choice. When he came at her, she defended herself. She stopped when it was done. Someone in the back muttered, 'Sounds rehearsed.' Another whispered, 'She's dangerous.'" Victor looked across the room. "Dangerous?" he repeated. "You think control is dangerous? That discipline is a threat?" He let the silence settle. "Maybe you're right. Maybe the real danger is raising a girl who won't let herself be broken." The room shifted, tension turning into something heavier, discomfort. The board chair finally stood. "We'll be conducting a full investigation," she said. "Effective immediately. Naomi Tran is suspended for 3 days pending review." Outside, as the crowd dispersed into the cold, someone bumped Naomi's shoulder. "Should have stayed where you came from," they muttered. Naomi didn't turn. That night, Victor replaced the old porch bulb and tightened the mat in the backyard. Naomi didn't ask why. She just stepped onto it and began her forms in the dark. Upstairs, Helen watched from the window, a blanket around her shoulders. The world might see her daughter as a threat, but from here, in the dark, Naomi just looked whole. The gym shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Not from competition, but from something quieter, more focused. Inside the community center downtown, Naomi stood barefoot on a mat, facing a line of young girls. Some were tall, some barely reached her shoulder. A few wore second-hand sweatpants, others came straight from school still in uniform, but they all watched her with the same wide, uncertain eyes. She began with breath work. "In through your nose," she said softly, "out through your mouth. If your breathing is steady, your body will follow." The first day, there were 5 girls, the second, 15. By the end of the week, over 20 stood in the room, white, black, Latina, native, a quiet spectrum of young faces watching Naomi move, not like a fighter, but like someone who had learned to listen to the ground before stepping. At first, a few parents objected. One mother, arms crossed, said to a staff member, "I don't want my daughter learning violence from some outsider." But another voice interrupted, from the back of the room, a soft-spoken girl who hadn't said a word until then. "She's not teaching us to fight," the girl said. "She's teaching us not to run." The center's director nodded to Naomi. "Keep going." Meanwhile, the online backlash worsened. Edited clips of Naomi's match with Clay resurfaced, now spliced with music and captions like, "Asian menace in the making." Comment threads exploded. Local talk radio picked up the story. One host asked, "Should trained martial artists even be allowed in public schools?" Naomi said nothing. She just kept showing up. One afternoon after class, a small boy wandered into the gym with his older sister. He tugged on Naomi's hoodie and asked, "Do you really know Kung Fu?" Naomi crouched to his level. "No," she said with a slight smile. "But I know how to fall without getting hurt." His eyes lit up. "Can you teach me that?" "Yeah," she whispered. "I can." That night, she sat on the couch beside Helen, watching the news cycle chew on her story like a bone. The anchor mentioned her by name, speculated about her emotional stability and martial background. Helen muted the TV. Naomi didn't look away. "They want me to explain myself," she said. Helen turned to her. "You don't owe anyone your softness." Naomi nodded. "But I want them to know. Strength isn't what they think it is." In the dark, her voice sounded older than her years. And in that moment, Helen didn't see a girl the town feared. She saw a teacher being born. The snow had melted by Monday, but the silence at Sheridan High remained. Naomi walked through the front entrance alone, backpack slung over one shoulder, hoodie clean, braid tight. No one blocked her path. No one called her name. They just stepped aside, not in fear, not in mockery, but in a strange quiet that followed her like a shadow of its own. In the hallway, a boy muttered, "Hey, Naomi," as she passed, barely loud enough for her to catch. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. Principal Roma called her into the office before lunch. His voice was different now, lower, slower, a touch unsure. "We're revising our policies," he said, tapping a folder. "Cultural sensitivity, bullying intervention, and a new student-led self-defense elective, if you're willing." Naomi didn't answer right away. She just looked at the sunlight falling through the blinds, catching the dust in the air like tiny truths. "I am," she said at last. That afternoon, she returned to the community center. Her class had doubled again, boys now joining, a few adults, even a teacher from the school. Naomi began with Stillness. "This isn't about combat," she told them. "It's about knowing your boundary and not apologizing for it." Victor no longer stood in the back. He watched from the hallway now, out of view. His presence no longer needed to protect, just to witness. Later that week, a local journalist visited. She asked Naomi for a quote, something to close her story. Naomi gave her nothing flashy. Just, sometimes being still is the hardest move to make. The piece ran under the headline, Stillness as Strength, How One Girl Taught a Town to Listen. But Naomi didn't read it. She was preparing for something else. At the end-of-year ceremony, Principal Roma invited her to speak. Naomi stood on stage in her school uniform, the gym packed with students, teachers, and parents, some supportive, some still undecided. She took a breath. "When I came to Sheridan, I thought silence would keep me safe," she began. "But I learned silence isn't safety. It's space. Space to watch, to think, to prepare. They told me not to be loud. So I wasn't, but I was still." She looked across the crowd. "And stillness is not weakness. It is the decision not to be pulled into someone else's chaos. It is the choice to move only when it matters." Applause didn't come all at once. It built, slow, strong, honest. Later, the school unveiled a mural outside the gym. Naomi in mid-motion, posture grounded, eyes calm. Above her, it read, "Move with purpose, stand with peace." She didn't smile when she saw it. She just nodded, like someone who knew the storm had passed and had chosen to stay.